We're going to talk about the aftermath of the very notable events of this weekend. But what's most amazing is not that these events occurred, but the way the Cardano blockchain performed exactly as advertised in the face of these events and even healed itself. If you're really only interested in your bags healing themselves back up to all-time highs and moon Lambos, or if you're finding value in these videos, please consider delegating to the Army of Spies DRep address and the Army of Spies stake pool, ticker AOS. All right, everyone, thank you. Thank you for joining. Let's see what we've got here. D.U, thank you. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. All right, Joe Davidson. Yep. This was 2 hours ago. Now it is time, finally. Yep. Now it is time. The time has changed now. Neo Chad is here. Bindocam is here. Bindocam is here. Saying let's go. Probably let's go. Eric Williams is here. Thank you for joining. Let's go, Eric. Mission Zambia is here. Good morning. Thank you for joining. Cardano for the win. Hello. Thank you for joining. Let's see. We got okay. Hilldog is here. Hilldog, thank you for joining. Thank you for joining. Island Native is here. Thank you. What's up? Thank you for joining. Otis Frichov is here. Bring on the rumors. Let's go. Let's go, Otis Frichov. Christian Bowman is here. Uncle Thanos is here. Thomas Kirkpatrick is here. Marco Cardano says, I'm just logging in quickly to thank you for the always relevant content and for your proactiveness regarding last week's double chain issue. It's 11 p.m. here, so I have to head to bed. Thank you for dropping into the comments. At least I appreciate that very much. Zelta says, yo, Zelta. Binocam says that was Swedish. Okay, good to know. Good to know. Antonino says, let's go. Ciao from Malta. Ciao. Thank you for joining. Marco says, Marco will watch the episode tomorrow. Sounds good. Sounds great. So obviously this was a pretty notable weekend. If you logged off, on like Thursday night and you didn't pay any attention to Crypto X, some things happened over the weekend, and we're going to talk about them. But the events were very notable. First of all, they were very notable and a little bit dramatic. Twig 231 says, hey, thanks for joining. Can we honestly say Cardano has not had any downtime now? Yeah, we'll talk about it. So I think the really interesting thing is there was an incident, but what that incident was and what it shows about Cardano, I think, are the debatable things. We can't debate. There was an incident. Some notable events did occur. I don't think anybody's debating that. But the question is what it actually means. Skolder is here. Is it Cardano like Don Ho or like Bookham Dano? I think it's more like Bookham Dano. I think it's more like Bookham Dano for sure. For sure. If you guys don't know what he's referring to, that is a reference to Hawaii 5.0. I think maybe some people saw the later Hawaii 5.0 that came out in like the last 10 years or something. But the original one was back in my day when I was a kid. That was still on TV, the original Hawaii 5.0. Okay, so let's talk about what actually happened. Okay, so I think a good starting point to discuss this is this post. So for anybody who doesn't know, this is Anatoly, co-founder of Solana. This is the man. This is the dude, co-founder of Solana. Certainly a different philosophical approach to crypto. This guy built a blockchain that has a larger market cap than Cardano, was sort of founded after Cardano. They surpassed us in terms of market cap by, sort of jokingly, we've always said they passed us by being a meme coin casino, right? I think you can say that. And I don't think, Solana people would necessarily take great offense to that because they were the best meme coin casino. There's no question about that part. They were the best at that. Whether they were the best at Some other things that Cardano tries to be the best at, that's debatable, but they were a much better meme coin casino and it led to a larger market cap than Cardano. So he knows what he's talking about when it comes to blockchains. This is not a random commenter. This is the co-founder of Solana. And what he had to say was this: I'm going to go out on a limb and actually say this is pretty cool. And he's referring to the events of this weekend. Nakamoto style consensus without proof of work is extremely hard to build. The protocol functioned as designed in the presence of bugs. So what happened was, and I think most people already know because we had an emergency meeting on Friday and discussed it, but there was a bug that emerged on the testnet. IOG noticed it. They started building a patch. While they were building this patch, the malformed transaction that illuminated the bug was created and broadcast on mainnet. And this caused a partition in the chains. So when we say partition in the chain, some people like to say fork, partition in the chains, whatever you want to say. What happened was we've got various versions of the node, right? Currently, Cardano is an ecosystem. The DReps have recently voted for a lot of funding of various other types of nodes. We'll have even better node diversity in the future soon. We've already set aside and sort of paid the money for that. And developers, various teams are hard at work on creating better node diversity for Cardano, something we've wanted for a long time. But what we have right now is not diversity in terms of a diverse number of nodes produced by diverse teams, but we have various versions of the node. So over the course of 2025, various newer versions, various updates to the node have come out. And the versions of the node that have come out since basically the very first node in 2025, those versions were impacted this weekend by a bug related to a library from 2022. The versions of the node prior to those versions were not impacted. So a large portion of the chain, of course, was on these newer versions of the node. A lot of the stake pools on the network, you're definitely aware, the stake pools are the validators in Cardano. So a large number of the validators on the network were impacted by this node. But another chunk of them, all of the stake pools that were not on those versions of the node, were not impacted. So this bug caused a fork in the chain. The impacted nodes were on one fork, we'll call it the bad chain, and the rest of the nodes were on what we'll call the good chain. So the bad chain accepted this malformed transaction that didn't conform to the specs of Cardano. It didn't conform to the specs of the protocol. The good chain rejected that transaction. So the way the ledger works, the whole point of consensus is we all have to come to consensus about what transactions are included in the ledger. So a fork will result if some of the nodes are accepting a transaction and some are not. And the reason this happened was because these newer versions of the node were impacted by this bug related to this 2022 library. So people were confused about that over the weekend, asking a lot of questions. That's probably about, if you want to know more details than that, people will far more eloquently explain this and in much greater detail all over X. So you've got the two chains. So the beautiful thing, so that's bad. This is kind of like the worst nightmare for most blockchains. It's bad when this happens. But Cardano has this crazy, beautiful architecture. When this thing happens, the people on the bad chain, what happens is the people on the bad chain and the people on the good chain will recognize the nodes. I'm saying people, but what I mean are nodes, validators. They'll recognize that there's two chains. And this happened over the weekend, and it became very apparent what had happened. Immediately, it was apparent because IOG already knew what happened because they saw it happen on the testnet. So when the same type of malformed transaction was broadcast on the mainnet, they already knew exactly what was happening. So they were already hard at work creating a patch for these newer versions of the node, and that patch was available to everyone who was on the impacted versions of the node, and they started updating. They started updating their version of the node to this new version that fixed the problem. So immediately the Cardano ledger, the two chains, this new now partitioned chain started self-healing. So this is the beauty, I think, of Cardano's architecture. In a lot of other blockchains, we famously make fun of Solana, Anatoly's blockchain, because it's like they have an off and on switch. Whenever this kind of thing happens, they just turn off the chain and everybody converges and they start again. In Cardano, we don't have to do that. In fact, when this happened on Cardano, all of us on the non-impacted version of the node, we just kept going like normal. We didn't have to do a thing. We just kept going on the good chain and nothing changed for us. There's Forerunner 93. What's up? Thanks for joining. Rulo, hola. Thank you for joining. Thank you for joining. So Kristen Bowman's pointing out people are calling this the chicken chain and the pig chain. Yep. You can find a lot of information. People are going to be very interested in dissecting exactly what happened here. But this is what it looked like for us. So I mentioned in the emergency meeting that I was on a call. As soon as it became apparent that there was a partition in the chain, I jumped on a call. And this is a picture of the person on the other end of the phone call. There were a few. There was more than one. There was more than two people, more than just me and this person. But the person who was most critical in determining what was going on was in this bar far from home. He actually had to commandeer a laptop. It wasn't even his laptop. He had to commandeer a laptop from somebody in the bar and sit down, and we figured out what was going on. Eventually, we determined that we were on the good chain and we actually didn't have to do anything. What was really interesting, though, is when we started looking at exactly when the problem started, I noticed this post. Consinomics had this post from the night before, and it was like, K. Charles, can you please restart Cardano? That's pretty weird. That's exactly what would happen in Solana. You'd have to stop, turn the chain off, start the chain again, what we at least make fun of Solana for. And so he posted this because he was noticing there hadn't been any updates on the Explorer he was using. There hadn't been any updates for 20 minutes on the Explorer he was using. So you got to remember the Explorers, they also might be on the good chain or the bad chain. And a little while later, he posted this. Seems there are some blocks going through, but it's going really slow. I guess the one who restarts gets the blocks. Shout out to Army of Spies. And at this point, when Consinomics made this post, they didn't know what was actually going on. It turned out what happened was apparently, it looks like, and maybe somebody knows exactly when the fork happened, but I think the fork did happen around this time. And we were on the good chain, so we made, according to this, 3 blocks in a row right when the fork happened because we were on the good chain. So you can see this is from Intersect. Intersect said the fork happened approximately 800 hours UTC. And if I went through and changed on the Explorer, I went through and changed the time to UTC, and it shows these blocks were pretty close to 800. This is about when Intersect says the fork happened, and we made these 3 blocks. So we realized as we looked at this, I was like, wait a second, did we make the first 3 blocks on the good chain after the fork happened? Not really important. It's kind of just, it was just chance that we happened to make a bunch of blocks, and it was also just chance that we were on the right version of the node to be on the good chain. But that was kind of an interesting discovery. What's more important is what happened later on in the day. So I noted here in the end, we were on a lucky node version and didn't actually need to do anything once we had scrambled to discover and verify that status. So while we were scrambling, we finally figured out we were on the good chain. What happened later in the day was the important part. Later in the day, the attack would be decisively defeated and the entire ecosystem would be on the good chain. So this green line here in this table is the good chain. The red line is the bad chain. And, within, I think it turned out to be like something like approximately 12 hours. Within 12 hours, the green line crossed the red line. And the beautiful thing about Cardano is what happened at that point. In Cardano, as soon as this green line crosses the red line, more than 51% of the nodes being on the correct chain, all of the nodes flip over, and all of a sudden everybody was on the correct chain. So this doesn't happen in other blockchain ecosystems. This is something that happens because of Cardano's architecture. Charles has talked about this in the past. You've heard Charles, if you followed Charles over the years, you've probably heard him talk about Cardano's self-healing properties, right? And it sounds like probably a lot of people just sort of glossed over that when he would talk about that. But this is exactly what Cardano was preparing for when these self-healing properties were built out. This is exactly what Charles was talking about. So this doesn't really happen in other ecosystems. And here's why I think this is important and what people should really be focused on. Let's see. So here's a question. Before we move to that, did the good transactions that got onto the bad chain get added into the good chain eventually? So, yeah. So a lot of things, a lot of transactions that happened on the the chain, the bad chain eventually gets discarded. The bad chain eventually gets discarded. It is a blockchain, so you can't, at the point of the fork, you've got this bad transaction that should not have been included, and in that, so you can't like the transactions that were linked to that the transactions that were linked to that bad transaction that should not have been accepted by the nodes, that chain is discarded at the end, which is why people are mad about this, right? If you could just sort of collapse the two chains, if you could just roll back the blockchain and collapse the two chains, then people wouldn't be as mad about this. Bindocam says, I think Charles mentioned about 500 transactions didn't make it. Kind of makes sense. Over the course of like 12 hours makes sense. That would be the length of that red line. This bug was injected into Charles's personal stake pool, the rat stake pool. Yep, that's right. That's correct. So here's what I think is interesting about this, though. You have to think this is a permissionless blockchain. Not all blockchains are actually permissionless, but they're all supposed to be. They're all supposed to be permissionless. If you're really doing crypto, your blockchain needs to be permissionless. That means people can build things on the blockchain. And one of the things they can build are new node software. In fact, like I said, we just paid for that. We just paid a bunch of different teams to start building additional node software so that we're not all relying on the IOG version. In any blockchain, you want to have nodes built by different teams in different programming languages. You want node diversity. So we're going to have a greater number of nodes in the future than we have now. And in fact, it's permissionless. So anyone could write node software for Cardano. And whether or not that node software is sort of a part of the ecosystem just depends on whether stake pools, validators start using it. If any number of nodes on the blockchain adopt that software will be in the mix on the blockchain. So because this is permissionless and anybody could write that software, anybody could also write a bug into that software, just like happened with these node versions that were impacted by this bug. Any version of the software in the future could include bugs. The beautiful thing about Cardano is that what happened today is that the protocol did exactly what it was designed to do. The protocol allowed for all of us on the good chain to keep making blocks and keep building the ledger on the good chain. It allowed the people who were on the other node versions to be on another chain. And then eventually, when 51% of all of the nodes were on the good chain, everything just sort of collapsed over to the good chain. So this happened this weekend, and it'll happen again in the future when somebody codes some new node software and also includes more bugs, or bugs emerge, we'll say. So this is actually a really interesting thing about Cardano, because in any ecosystem, you can imagine the same thing is true. If it's permissionless, anybody can write new node software, and blockchains in general, blockchain ecosystems are going to want increased node diversity. So this is going to happen to every blockchain on a long enough timeline. If they're permissionless and anybody can write new versions of the software, there are going to be more bugs. But in Cardano, we've got this self-healing feature that eventually, once more than 51% of the nodes are on the good chain, it's going to collapse over. And, like you saw this weekend, we notice when there's a chain partition. It's not like we didn't notice. In fact, in Cardano, IOG noticed on the testnet. Patrick, thanks for joining. Binochem says, yeah, that's one reason it stinks. It's hard to describe to someone that's not technical. Now, canonical chain never did stop, but some people were on the bugged one. Just briefly was running too. That's exactly what happened. But it would normally have killed a different proof of stake model. That is exactly true. And that's what Anatoly is getting at here. Nakamoto style consensus, which is what I was just describing, without proof of work is extremely hard to build. It's really hard to do proof of stake Nakamoto consensus. This is one of the special things about Cardano. Cardano is just like Bitcoin, except instead of using proof of work to choose who validates the next block, Cardano uses proof of stake, which is really hard to do. Was this an accidental sidechain? So let's talk about how this happened. That's a great segue. Let's talk about exactly how this happened. So we just explained how this got resolved. And here's even more information about, if you want to read the whole saga of how this happened, it was kind of an incredible story. All of Intersect, IOG, the CF, the Cardano Foundation, and Emergo kind of came together and worked in this war room to help resolve the situation. Didn't sleep, just kind of sat in the war room, worked away until this thing was resolved. And Carlos, this post from Carlos here has kind of the complete saga. A lot of people involved, and eventually they got to this point, which resolved the situation. But quite a little saga and a very nice story about unity in the Cardano blockchain ecosystem. So how did this happen? So apparently, and I think everybody has probably seen the actual post. We can look at that post in just a second, but this is the person who has taken credit for what happened this weekend, and I mean that jokingly. This person did not want to take credit, but here's something important to note. So this is the Cardano Gov tool DRep directory, because this person was a DRep. And when you look at what they list as their qualifications, this is important. Early tester, stake pool operator from beginnings of the ITN, member of Cardano's Operator Guild, co-owner of AAA Stake Pool with 8,500 lifetime blocks, developer, tester, infrastructure provider for Koios Elastic API project, Scooper operator. This is a batcher for SundaySwap. This person's been a batcher for SundaySwap since January 2022, and a software developer with 20 years of experience. So this is a person who is a stake pool operator in Cardano, going back to the ITN, the very beginnings of public stake pools, has already produced 8,500 blocks, has built tools that are used by the SPO community. In fact, helped many SPOs with questions over the last few years, has helped many SPOs with problems, challenges with stake pools, and is even a batcher for SundaySwap, one of our very well-known dexes, and has 20 years of experience. So this is all important when you read stuff like this. So this is Nick Carter. I actually have followed Nick Carter's work quite closely, even on this channel. We've talked about his posts on this channel because he covered Operation Choke Point 2.0, when the last White House administration, when the executive branch of the US government was cracking down on everything crypto, when they were doing everything possible to push crypto off the economic map. Nick Carter was one of the people who followed this very closely, which is why I think a lot of us in Cardano were disappointed when we saw this post. This post said, today in blockchains, some guy vibe coded an exploit which brought down the entire Cardano blockchain. So that's not what happened for multiple reasons. So first of all, he said the guy vibe coded an exploit, which kind of implies that, the guy didn't necessarily have any skills and he just sort of relied on AI to code an exploit. And then he also said that this brought down the entire Cardano blockchain. You can see immediately he got community noted. the community note says Cardano had a brief chain split from a crafted transaction, but the network did not stall. Blocks kept being produced and nodes updated to rejoin the main chain. It was not brought down. And in fact, down below here, I even commented and explained to him, what happened with our validator. Nothing at all. We just kept making blocks at exactly the time he's talking about. Our stake pool just kept making blocks because we happened to be on one of the lucky versions of the node. We didn't have to patch anything. We didn't have to update anything. Our stake pool kept making blocks then. It's still making blocks now. And we didn't have to do any patching, any updating at all. So just to explain to him that our chain did not, in fact, go down. But Crypto X was sort of replete with these kind of posts throughout the day. Many, many people, all of whom have, kind of criticized Cardano in the past, had posts like this. And they all kind of implied that some dude just, asked AI, hey, how can I create an exploit and bring down Cardano? And then that happened, which is not at all what happened. So the actual community note, at first it was kind of an interesting thing to watch evolve because the original community note didn't wasn't as strong. The community note kind of came in and it sort of like, it was kind of like, oh, that's not exactly what happened. But here the community note has sort of evolved to become like a stronger and stronger rejection of what these accounts like his were saying. And it wasn't just him, it was a bunch of the usual characters who usually try to make very critical posts of Cardano. Lone Eagle says, this is why Charles takes this bug personally. So we can actually we looked at this on Friday during the emergency meeting, but if you read this post, it's kind of interesting. So Charles, I think everybody already knows, Charles immediately contacted apparently the FBI when this happened. And he did a little video and revealed enough details about who the culprit here was that I think it was going to be impossible for this person. I don't think Charles said the actual name of the person in the original video, but he did say they had already traced it to a specific pool on the ITN. And I believe the person's identity was linkable to that ITN pool. So as soon as that video came out, all of a sudden we saw these posts come out from this person. And basically he describes how he's very sorry. It was him who endangered the network with careless actions. And he sort of made it sound like it was just some personal challenge. Let's see if I can reproduce the bad transaction from the test net on the main net. And then he sort of claims that he relied on AI's instructions on how to block all traffic in and out of his Linux server. He didn't test that on the testnet first, and then he watched in horror as the last block time on Explorers froze. So he's kind of claiming that he didn't really mean to broadcast this on the mainnet. I felt awful as I realized the scale of what I've caused. But then you see, he says, I am truly sorry. I didn't have evil intentions. But then he says, yes, Rat's pool ID, this is Charles's stake pool. I had to pick some pool ID. I'm ashamed of my carelessness and take full responsibility for it, and whatever consequences will follow. I'm sorry. I'm a bad human being. But then he also says, I'm sure a part of me deep inside was a bit frustrated with some things people in recent months and years, just as I'm sure some part of me had some quiet confidence that blocks would continue being made in the worst case scenario. But I know it's just words on screen at this stage. So it's kind of like he's sort of like trying to imply that he didn't mean to broadcast it. But then at the same time, he's sort of explaining that he was frustrated and he says, I'm sure some part of me had confidence that blocks would continue being made in the worst case scenario. So it's like, if you never meant to broadcast it, why would you be thinking about, why would you be thinking about blocks being, continuing to be made? If you never meant to broadcast that on the main net, it's like, why would you be thinking about the ramifications on the main net? So this is, a lot of people are not buying any of this and believe that this was kind of intentional. And we never would have seen this apology if the malformed transaction hadn't immediately been linked to him. So Charles obviously already talked to the FBI apparently. And it's kind of interesting because if you go into this post by Anatoly, I think it's this one. Is it this one? Yeah. So immediately, so Anatoly made this post, and Charles pretty immediately was like, "Thanks, man. It was a wild day." And so Anatoly jumps into a sort of a defense of the person who sent that transaction. He says communicating arbitrary bits is fundamentally speech, even if they break the receiver. The fact that it's not always the case in the US is lame. Don't send the feds after the poor guy who messed up vulnerability disclosure. So the problem with this is Anatoly's kind of trying to say, hey, this is just a way to communicate that there was a vulnerability there. But I think what Anatoly maybe didn't know when he posted this was that had already been communicated, because it originally happened on the test net and IOG already knew about it. Then this person apparently saw this on the test net and duplicated it on the main net. You remember in his own post, he said, it started off as a let's see if I can reproduce the bad transaction personal challenge. So he claims he was just reproducing what he'd already seen. So even the person who apparently is admitted to this is admitting that they weren't communicating an unknown vulnerability. They were reproducing what they'd already seen, and the place they saw that was obviously the test net. So I don't know that Anatoly knew that when he made this post. I think he was thinking this was like, that this could be framed as a person just trying to communicate a vulnerability. Charles came back with, it was a premeditated attack by a disgruntled SPO with extensive knowledge of Cardano. We know that from what we read in his DRep directory self-description, who had already observed the testnet fork, the patch efforts, and was in direct contact with the core devs. So this part's kind of interesting. When I first read this, I took this to mean that maybe our culprit here was talking with the core devs about that testnet fork before he even broadcasted on mainnet. That would be pretty damning if that's the case. I can't tell if Charles is saying that or if he's saying that this is a person who in the past had been in direct contact with core devs, which I very much believe, because he's a very well-known personality. All of us know who this person is. I think all SPOs probably know who he is, or many SPOs. And like I pointed out from his profile here, he's created tooling which is well known in the SPO community. So I don't think Anatoly knew any of that. I think he thought that this was just some random person who broadcast this transaction on mainnet, and maybe it could be framed as, oh, he's basically doing white hat stuff to communicate this vulnerability because he claims he didn't make any money off it. Maybe he just clumsily communicated this vulnerability. So Charles points out, and I believe Charles meant to type he here instead of we. He spent hours studying it, reconstructing it for mainnet, and then delegating to my personal pool rats as a message. He only admitted this act after I doxed him in a video, then claiming it was a terrible mistake, but somehow neglected to mention it during the entire day while we were fixing it. This is true, as near as I could tell. I only saw that, apology, that online apology, after Charles had already published his video, which identified his ITM pool. Black hats exploiting bugs to cause harm to public infrastructure is not a new thing. It's a federal crime because of the catastrophic harm to society such acts could carry. Cardano is a large network, and many people derive their entire livelihood from the network's operation. He hurt every single person in our ecosystem. And then Anatoly kind of backtracks a little bit. Yeah, I get it. We've had guys like that watch public branches for any bug fixes and try to exploit them immediately. It's a huge pain. Any potential bugs have to be fixed in private and rolled out P2P patches first. It has a chilling effect, but he says it has a chilling effect in the industry if you call on the feds. So, I think it's fair for anybody in the Cardano ecosystem at this point. Like, anybody could have had a transaction on that bad chain that caused them. They could have had a valid transaction. Somebody cited it as 500 transactions that got left behind. Anybody could have had a transaction on that chain. on Friday, I had read posts from people claiming that they had gotten liquidated in certain positions because they had a transaction on that chain, things like that. I think anybody in that position could look at this scenario and say, this isn't right. Even if this guy carelessly did this, and I think a lot of people are reading his apology, especially that part about, being frustrated and him sort of thinking about the worst case scenario. I think a lot of people are reading that and thinking it's intentional, but just as a kind of, mental experiment here, even if we um, say we're going to assume it was an accident, still might rise to the level of negligence or recklessness, that makes it hard to debate anybody who lost money because of this, contacting the authorities and saying this was actually criminal behavior. So who knows if this will happen? Charles eventually and everybody kind of identified that the person is in Australia. Obviously, the FBI is a U.S. federal law enforcement organization, but they have attaché offices basically all over the world, especially, Five Eyes countries like Australia. So we'll see if anything actually comes of this, but I don't blame the people who, I understand Anatoly's argument here, like, saying, maybe this could, maybe calling in the feds is not the right choice. But I also very much understand the arguments made by people like Charles, who are like, no, this is an attack on our system. People probably lost money. Some people, derive their livelihood from the network's operation. This guy needs to be prosecuted as a, even just as a form of deterrence to prevent people from doing this in the future. So, there's I think there's legitimate arguments on both sides of this, and I don't blame anybody who is calling for him to be prosecuted over this. And also, I also would not argue against anybody who says they think this was intentional and that all the apologies and the descriptions of how this accidentally, air quotes, accidentally happened. The people who don't buy into that, I can sympathize with their position. Huji Whammer says, we were lucky there were enough SPOs that were slow to upgrade, as they were the ones that were validating on the good chain until the new patch version was released. Yeah, this is why it's not good for everybody to upgrade at the same time. This is why you don't want to have this thing where everybody upgrades at the same time. But also the flip side of that is, if it would have been an older version of the node that had experienced the bug, everybody would be blaming those validators for not updating fast enough. So the thing that's true is that node diversity wins the day, and that can be diversity of nodes created by different teams, and in this case, diversity of versions of the same node created by the IOG team. So node diversity always wins, though. Jeff Burns says, playing hooky tomorrow. So happy, no fiat mining, and I get to join. All right, sounds good, man. That sounds great. Thanks for joining. Everybody ready to talk badly about Cardano? We're on it like locusts. Some were deleting their posts to avoid the community notes. Yeah, I believe that. I believe there's probably some deletions. I didn't even have to look to see who was getting community noted. Like, in my head, I could already just guess which accounts were making ridiculous posts about Cardano and getting community noted. And when I went back and looked, sure enough, all of them pretty much were. Rulo says, let's start a class action just as a group challenge. Nothing more. Super hilarious. He's pointing to the fact that that Homer J says, it started off as a let's see if I can reproduce a bad transaction personal challenge. That'd be pretty funny if somebody carried out what Rulo is suggesting and just said, oh, it's just a group challenge. No big deal. If this is not malicious, he could have summited a bug reward and been bug reward with millions. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I can't tell which what Charles is trying to say with he had been in contact with core devs, whether he meant on with respect to this issue or just in the past. But either way, he could have communicated this bug to core devs without doing this, and who knows, maybe he could have negotiated a bug reward. It's possible. Probably a lot of us, given the impact of this bug, probably in retrospect, at least, a lot of us probably would have ponied up for a bug reward like that if it could have prevented this, because this caused a lot of trouble, pretty much for all of the SPOs, and definitely for anybody who had transactions on the bad chain that were dropped from the ledger. If it were not malicious, he would have not gone through the trouble of learning what the bug was before testing on main, following AI instructions, bullocks. Yeah, it doesn't really ring true to my ears. It doesn't ring true to my ears for sure when I read that. The bug was found on testnet and the impact could be seen there. It is very hard to believe someone would try reproducing on mainnet, even if they try to do it in isolation. That's how I feel. It's like, it's like there's no white hat information signaling. There's no vulnerability signaling if the core devs already saw it on testnet. There's no valuable reduction of information asymmetry if the core devs already saw it. So Minocam says, now clemency, I might say, would be a pragmatic move. Still, that guy should be removed from any dev circle. Yeah, what's amazing is there's still a bunch of delegation in his pool. And I'm sure, I haven't checked like in the last couple hours, but there's probably delegation in his pool and delegation to his DRep address. So, but I mean, honestly, I would sort of expect that would go on for quite a long time, because there are people in Cardano, and I don't blame them, who can't keep up with Cardano news because they're very busy. So there'll probably be delegation to that pool and that DRep address for a long time, just because people won't even hear about this incident. Otis Frichiov says, with his background and knowledge, it's difficult to believe AI would be needed to replicate the bug. It's more of he knew what he was doing. Yeah, I noticed a lot of the Cardano criticizers were we're trying to claim that he, vibe coded the exploit. A lot of them use the phrase vibe coded the exploit, but really what he did was just replicate a malformed transaction. So if they had looked into it, they probably would have said he used AI to vibe code, vibe form the malformed transaction or something. But I don't think they even looked into it. I don't think they even read his post, because nowhere in his post does he that I see does he say that he used AI to replicate the transaction. The only time he mentions AI that I think I can see is when he says, I was dumb enough to rely on AI's instructions on how to block all traffic in and out of my Linux server. But if he's a 20-year software developer, I mean, how much did he really need AI's instructions even for that? I don't know. Who knows, who knows what he did during his 20 years of software development. But yeah, this all seems a bit fishy. Jeff Burns says this is a Benedict Arnold move. He kind of feels that way, doesn't it? Mallow, morning. Good morning. Nah, he didn't say anything till he knew he was exposed. Yeah, that's true. That's pretty much true. So I think, I'm always for, I mean, if this does if this does end up in the hands of the authorities, and like the FBI would have to coordinate with, their Australian counterparts, if it does go that far, obviously, like a prosecutor will decide if this is something they want to pursue. And then, either a judge or a jury will be the sort of, determiner of guilt here, if it even goes that far. So I don't think we need to make our own judgments on that piece of it. But yeah, when I first saw this, I wrote out a post that was kind of expletive laden when I first saw this on Friday. And then I sort of erased it, and I just said, this is like a breathtaking lapse in judgment, because whether you think this is criminal, not criminal, the FBI should be called, the FBI shouldn't have been called, whatever you think, like this is incredibly bad decision-making, whether you think that the bad decision-making amounts to criminality or not, or what level of intent or recklessness and negligence there was there. No matter what, this is like incredibly bad decision-making that a lot of people suffered over. So there you go. I bet he will be buying Knight for privacy. So this is also a good segue. We'll get to we'll talk about Knight in just a second. he should have unplugged the network cable to isolate his machine. There you go. I mean, it's like obviously obviously this was not an air capped machine. I think we can say that at a minimum. Yeah. Okay, let's see. Rulo says laugh out loud. The expert couldn't run sudo UFW default, deny outgoing, give me a break. Yeah, this is my problem. The 20-year software expert could not prevent his machine from broadcasting this malformed transaction on mainnet. I hate to see a Cardano contributor going in this direction. Yeah, this is some terrible like internal Cardano drama. I mean, I won't say this is a self-inflicted wound because none of us were at his keyboard operating his mouse. This wasn't us. We didn't do this to ourselves. He did this to us, and obviously this is based on what Charles said and even what he wrote here. This is based, some part of this sounds like some part of this was some drama, some bad feelings towards Charles. It sounds that way, at least. Binocam says, I mean, there is some validity in that what idiot would try to use his own pool, but still. Yeah, but I mean, it's so if I remember correctly, what Charles said is they traced it to that ITN pool because the ADA that had been used for this transaction had come from an ITN pool. So it had come from his ITN pool, which has a different ticker than his current pool, if I understand correctly. So it wasn't super direct. It was a little bit obscured. So he might have thought that nobody would ever find out it was him. Maybe, I don't know. It was careless. I mean, there was carelessness involved here, no matter how you put it. So, yeah, I can't. Surely this person is regretting this so much at this point. Probably the moment he typed out this thread, the amount of regret was very great. The question is whether he regretted it because of the impact or because he got caught or both or just because he got caught. So this was, yeah, breathtakingly bad decision-making by this person. So everybody got community noted who tried to jump in on us. Maybe not everybody, but a lot did. Again, though, I would say, yeah, I think the vast majority of the people are coming to this conclusion. Words in the wilderness. I think the vast majority are probably with you. If you put a gun on my head and say, was this the accident that he described it as? If I had to guess, just my wild guess, was this the accident he describes it as, or was this malicious behavior? It's hard to disagree with you here. So a lot of people got community noted who tried to dogpile on Cardano. So not really. If you're permissionless, you have to let people write node software, and because like somebody could write node software, and maybe they are a stake pool operator, and they start running that software themselves. They write their own node software and they run it on their own stake pool with their own stake pool. You can't prevent that. There's no way to prevent that. And in fact, you want node diversity. It just has to match the node software just has to match the specifications of the protocol. So the beautiful thing about Cardano, the good thing that they showed about Cardano is that Cardano is going to heal itself. The self-healing properties of Cardano were what made this so smooth. If we were, some other blockchains, we would have to do the off and on thing. I mean, we all make fun of Solana for having to turn their blockchain off and turn it back on. It's this kind of stuff that forces them to do that. And the crazy good architecture of Cardano allowed for the nodes on the good chain to just keep doing everything like normal. And eventually the nodes from the bad chain got folded into the good chain. So no, there's no way to prevent this. If somebody wants to write their own node software, they could run it, and they could, potentially include, they could be impacted by bugs just like this in the future. And, if it's just one person, it's a little bit different scenario. Here the reason this happened was because we had this like large number of stake pool operators who had adopted the node versions that had this problem. If it's just one stake pool operator, it's different, but yeah, I mean, this could happen. There's no way to prevent it. It's permissionless. So, yeah, Daniil says for sure people arguing the opposite need a lecture on human nature. Yep, I agree with that. That's where the node diversity comes into play. You wouldn't end up with any majority with the same bug. Yeah, the beautiful thing, if we have nodes, hopefully soon, written by multiple teams, and like 20% of the network is on this node, 15% is on this node, then you hope that a majority of the nodes are on a version of the node software that doesn't have the bug. The reason why you want to have, like a whole bunch of different node software implementations is so that you've always got like, ideally like 80% of them aren't having the same problem. So Jeff Burns says all the money I had to spend on engineers to fix this, and the money in bad blocks got to be pricey. Yeah, I mean, all those people in that room, even just the people in that room, that war room, working on this all day. If you added together their sort of hourly rate, it probably even just that part was probably a crazy amount of money. And they're still, they're still like dealing with this. They're still figuring out, how to deal with this for sure. Yep. I think this is the beauty. This is the beauty. The self-healing nature of Ouroboros was put on display here to such an extent that even the co-founder of Solana was impressed. So that part's probably going to get lost in the shuffle by a lot of people. But I mean, that's probably the most important thing that happened here. I mean, is it possible in the future? In the future, hopefully we have enough node diversity that this kind of thing never happens again. But, several years down the road, we might actually appreciate that this happened because it highlighted the self-healing. This was a chance for Cardano's self-healing properties to be on full display. So, yeah, notable weekend for sure. Here's something that's also notable. I've talked about this quite a bit. I keep mentioning that Chase throughout my whole time in crypto, I've always heard about Chase closing accounts on people for being involved in crypto. Here we have Jack Mallers of El Salvador, crypto adoption fame. Jack Mallers actually got his accounts closed by Chase, according to this. And so, of course, he framed it. If you look at the date there, it was in September 2025. They say, during the course of ongoing monitoring, we identified concerning activity on your account or an account that you are associated with under the Bank Secrecy Act and other regulations. Financial institutions have an obligation to periodically review our customer relationships. So what they're saying is their AML people, their anti-money laundering people, saw some things going on in his account they didn't like. But Chase has closed so many accounts just for being involved in Bitcoin. And it looks like they're still closing accounts, at least of Bitcoin people. I won't pretend to know what's going on in Jack Maller's specific accounts, but Bo Hines here says, hey, Chase, you guys know Operation Choke Point is over, right? Just checking. So Chase still not loving crypto, even though Jamie Dimon has kind of flipped on crypto. So Create the Imaginable says, what if you swapped 1 million ADA to JED on the bad chain? Is your money lost forever? So it's a little bit more complicated than that, because if that transaction got thrown away, so the question would be whether or not your ADA moved from your account to the other one on the good chain. So if the whole thing got thrown away, then your money might not have moved to JED. But let's say you moved your money to JED before the fork, and then there was some pause in between your ADA going to the counterparty to your transaction. Let's make it simple and not even say it was like you're minting JED on the JED DApp or whatever. Let's say you're just buying some JED from somebody just for simplicity. So let's say you send them your ADA to buy the JED before the fork, and then when they go to send you the JED in exchange for your ADA, it's on the bad fork, then you'd have a problem. So if only one of the transactions is included on the good chain and the other one is in the chain that died, then you've got a problem. If you already sent your ADA to your counterparty and then they sent the JED, but they were on the bad chain when they sent the JED, like their wallet provider broadcast the transaction where you signed for the JED to leave, where the counterparty signed for the JED to leave their wallet and go to you, then you've got a problem. You've got a problem. So obviously what you're describing is going to be more like, is going to have to do with, whether how quick the transactions are, if there's actually, if it could possibly happen exactly, exactly when the fork happened. So hopefully nobody found themselves in that situation. Words in the Wilderness says different nodes can make the problem worse if not implemented properly. Charles has always made it clear the need for AGDA-driven node development. Yeah, it's times like these when you're super happy about all the academic rigor in Cardano. So hopefully that continues with the advancement of node diversity. I agree with you. So, I gave that example not as something that realistically could happen. Like, I don't think anybody's going to create some terrible node in their basement and some terrible node software in their basement. And then 51% of the stake pools are going to adopt that. I don't think that's realistic, but just to, explain the theoretic possibilities here. That's why I described that. They also did this during London Blockchain Conference that Charles is at. Yep, true. So Binokem says it either never happened or if it was replayable, it worked fine. He's talking about that JED example. If you can do your groceries without KYC, then the banks still have the upper hand. True. We currently can't really do our groceries with the lack of a de minimis tax exemption too. So that's also hurting us. The tax treatment makes you not want to do your groceries with normal crypto. Stable coins you could, but you're right. KYC AML is still a problem even with stable coins. The only positive thing from the dude's experience is that Cardano did prove it as a solid project. Yeah. Otis Fricio says, don't forget to hit the like button. Thank you for saying that. I appreciate it. Jay Marie is here. Yeah, thanks for joining, man. Feel free to join late anytime. So anyways, yeah, Chase appears to still be up to their tricks. But again, like I said, we don't know what's going on inside Jack Mallers' wallet. So maybe it was some completely different problem. People amused by that in the comments. So I think somebody mentioned privacy and midnight. So let's jump to something completely different. I think this is kind of interesting also. So here's an article from Arthur Hayes. So I've talked about Arthur Hayes many times on this channel, and he writes these amazing articles, right? He is very attuned to what's going on inside the US government between the Fed and the administration and the Treasury. Not so much attuned like he's getting inside of information. He just has very insightful analysis. And I don't agree with his conclusions often, but he's a very, very good writer. And these are actually very, very, very well written articles, very fun to read. He's calling Bessent the Treasury Secretary, Buffalo Bill Bessent. He's always referred to Yellen. When she was in office, he referred to Yellen as bad girl Yellen for good reasons. But what's kind of interesting, so he goes through his whole thing, and he's very much, on the thesis that the only thing that matters is liquidity. I agree with him. Pretty much the only thing that matters for crypto, because we're in this world where Austrian economics has been forsaken completely, and the monetary base is just manipulated relentlessly. We're constantly debasing the dollar, and it's just this liquidity cycle. And, famously, crypto has been on this 4-year cycle just because that's been roughly the liquidity cycle. But I agree with him that it really is all liquidity. So he has these great articles where he basically analyzes almost every aspect of what's going on with liquidity, what's, what indicators are present that we might have better liquidity, we might have higher liquidity, lower liquidity. He's almost entirely focused on this. You can tell what he's focused on here just by looking at this picture of Jerome Powell, Biden, and who he calls bad girl Yellen, U.S. Secretary Treasury, bad girl Yellen. So we're not actually going to talk about the liquidity stuff right now. What I think is interesting is what he's doing in his family office, his fund, Maelstrom. So this part right here is actually pretty interesting. He says, over the weekend, I raised our USD stable position in anticipation of lower crypto prices. The only crypto I believe can outrun the negative dollar liquidity situation in the short term is Zcash, with AI, big tech, and big government privacy across most sectors of the internet is dead. Zcash and their privacy cryptos using zero-knowledge proof cryptography are humanity's only chance to fight this new reality. That is why Balaji and others believe the privacy meta-narrative will drive crypto markets for many years to come. Why am I telling you this? Is it because I want everybody to become interested in Zcash? No, it's because I think people believing this and somebody as big as Arthur Hayes writing about this is a good indication there's going to be a lot of interest in midnight. There's going to be a lot of interest in midnight. So Words in the Wilderness says he's very detailed when it comes to macro analysis, but very surface level when it comes to blockchain tech. I could agree with that. He's like the man on macro analysis. And I don't think even Arthur Hayes would say, I don't think he would say that he's the man when it comes to technical analysis. I don't think he sees himself or even aspires to be a cryptographer or even just a blockchain tech guy. I don't think that's where his talents lie. But he is very attuned also. So he is a macro guy for sure, but he is also very attuned to sort of crypto trends, which is why I think this article is interesting. And it's not for technical reasons. It's just sort of, when guys like him are on something, because he's always on the latest trend, it's a good barometer of sort of the interest level in things outside of Cardano. So the fact that he's talking about privacy, Balaji has been talking about privacy, is kind of interesting. So he does say something that I think this is reflective of sort of like the larger psychology of crypto. He says it should offend our sensibilities as disciples of Satoshi that the third, fourth, and fifth largest cryptos are a USD derivative, a do-nothing coin on a do-nothing chain, and CZ's centralized computer. Of course, the USD derivative is Tether. The thing he's calling a do-nothing coin on a do-nothing chain is XRP. Don't come after me, XRP army. That's Arthur Hayes saying that, not me. So don't come after me, but he did say it. And then he calls BNB CZ's centralized computer. He says, what are we doing this for if after 15 years, these are the largest cryptos after Bitcoin and Ether? I have nothing against Paolo, Garlinghouse, and CZ. They are masters of creating value for their token holders. But Zcash or a similar type of privacy crypto belongs right below Ethereum. And I believe that the grassroots crypto community is waking up to the fact that what we implicitly support by affording these types of coins or tokens, these higher market caps, is at odds with the decentralized future where a red-blooded human retains agency in the face of oppressive tech, government, and AI giants. Therefore, Zcash or another privacy-focused crypto, what could that be, will enjoy a secular rise in price whilst we wait for Buffalo Bill Besant, to get his money printing groove back on. So again, the reason why I'm bringing this up is not because I think people should get involved with Zcash. It's because when somebody like Arthur Hayes, who is kind of like always just waiting to surf the next trend, he's actually a skier. I don't know that he surfs, but he's definitely a skier. If he's just waiting for the next trend, and this is the trend he's jumping on right now, this might be like pretty good. This might be a pretty good environment for midnight to be hitting on December 8th. BindoChem says, you want to pin night as a big ticket? I don't want to pin anything. Because I think it's too hard to predict. I think it's too hard to predict these markets. So I don't think I would ever pin anything in any way. But I will say, like, a lot of the sentiment around the greater crypto ecosystem right now is pretty primed for privacy. I think, I mean, we've talked about it on this channel. The only thing pumping is Zcash. The only thing doing well, really, for the last while is Zcash. Could we paint a better environment for midnight? Sure, we could. If like all of crypto was pumping and Bitcoin was 250K, that would be better. But in the face of this kind of challenging environment, could we paint a better picture for midnight to be launching? Pretty tough. Like, actually, maybe the better way to put it is, if what I'll call the greater Cardano ecosystem were to be launching a partner chain, could we have picked a better partner chain? Could we possibly be launching a better partner chain right now? I don't think so. I think Midnight is about the best thing that the greater Cardano ecosystem could be launching right now. So I think we're in pretty good shape there. So I'm excited to see we're inching closer and closer to the launch date for Midnight. And who knows, I mean, it's still a ways away. What are we, like 15 days away? So over 2 weeks away. A lot can happen. Things move fast in crypto. So a lot could happen in between now and the launch of Midnight. But the scavenger mine's already over. Phase 1 of the glacier drop, where we all claimed our allocations or didn't for the amount we were allocated because of our ADA, is already over. So now, no matter what we have to do, no matter what happens, we're just waiting anyways. There's not a lot we can do. So we'll see what happens, but things are definitely trending in the right direction for Midnight. It seems that way. Jeff Burns says, I feel I'm the only person that doesn't want ETF or USDC or USDT on Cardano. Do people forget the whole point of crypto? No, I feel the same. I keep telling everybody that I question whether or not USDC or USDT is going to do for Cardano, what it would do for Cardano, whether it would do for Cardano what people think it's going to do. And kind of the same thing with an ETF. It's these are centralized things. And I think the whole point of Cardano is the whole point of crypto. It's decentralization and the liberty that can create it, the freedom that can be created through decentralization. So I'm with you. And I think a lot of other people are too. I think there's a greater percentage of those types of people who sympathize with your point, and the point that I would make in Cardano probably than a lot of other ecosystems. I think if you went over to, BNB or Solana or a lot of different places, you'd have a much smaller percentage of people who would agree with you and me. So Bino Kim says, yeah, but it's probably coming. Listen to Charles' newfound Unity video. Sounds like he's resigned to do it despite the cost. What are you talking about? Charles is resigned to do, oh, you mean USDC. Charles is resigned to do USDC. We'll see. I mean, it sounds like the only thing that needs to be done is pay Circle's price tag or Tether's price tag or whatever tier 1 stablecoin, you choose. Charles has said in the past, he already knows what those prices are. So, I mean, I'm sure whoever he's talking to will just go ahead and do it if somebody pays the price tag. I'm sure, it's going to happen if they pay it. So, Jeff says greed will kill us. Yeah, one of the attractive things about Cardano is we're kind of trying to do it. The crypto way. Like, I think one of the attractive things about, Charles's videos over the years, the whiteboard video, the midnight whiteboard video, is that he seems to really be trying to do things the crypto way and not just give lip service to the crypto ethos while, actually only being interested in courting banks. I think that describes a lot of crypto. It's like give lip service to the ethos and philosophy of crypto, but actually only be courting, adoption by centralized entities and development of centralized things. Because there are a lot of platforms on crypto that people very much identify with crypto that are extremely centralized. A lot of the way a lot of even platforms run, it's basically like, just duplication of TradFi rails on less than decentralized crypto rails. So I agree with you. Words in the Wilderness says, I think Knight will move and shake the market. In my opinion, the roadmap is much quicker than Cardano's as it takes a pragmatic route. I wonder how it will work with Starstream. Yeah, I don't know too much about Starstream yet. I see Sebastian's posts about Starstream. I actually don't even know that much about Starstream yet. But for sure, you're correct. The roadmap is much quicker for those. What is it? 4 phases of midnight. Hilo starting on December 8th is great because I was almost bracing myself for. Obviously we didn't know the names until Charles announced them, but I was almost bracing myself for Charles to get up on that stage and say that Hilo, whatever it was going to be called, would be starting on, like January 8th, and then everything else, kind of happening, on a 2026 schedule. So I was happy at least the coin is going to be circulating. I was happy the coin at least is going to be circulating in 2025. And then obviously we'll get the other ones. I just had to grab the note to remember the names of these eras. The subsequent eras are called Kukolu, Mohalu, and Ua. Those are happening in Q1, Q2, and Q3 according to schedule. Again, this is like software development, basically. I guess we can call it network development. So I would guess that those actually happen, at least a full quarter after when, he says they're going to happen. And not just Charles, but any person in charge of the development of software, whatever dates they give, normally I would say a year later than they actually say. But in this case, since everything's supposed to happen in 2026, maybe I would say just like, some number of quarters later than when they say it's going to happen. So we'll see. We'll see. The roadmap is quicker though. Thank goodness, because they could have easily gone for the same kind of roadmap for Midnight as they did for Cardano. We could be looking at Kukolu 2027, and then 1 year for each of the subsequent eras. So it's I'm glad to see that the network validation at least will be happening on a decentralized basis in 2026. That's great. If we could just get that, I think that's a very good start. Because while I think there's, obviously there's wisdom in starting with a federated mainnet just to get things kicked off, just like we did in Cardano, that worked great in Cardano. There will be people complaining about it during the federated validation era. There'll be people complaining about it, even though the roadmap is obviously to move from that to decentralized validation in, a number of months, basically. Adam, good morning. I think this is Adam. Is it Adamaso Blinskas? Adamaso Blinskas. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for joining. Jeff Burns says, if anything gets USDM on Coinbase and big exchanges, I don't know how I feel about using treasury funds for USDM LQ on Cardano dexes. It is needed, but I don't know. Yeah, I mean, honestly, if USDM could somehow get on Coinbase, that's a very different environment than we're in now, right? Because I think the big problem is you can buy USDC on Coinbase, right? And Coinbase is the fiat on-ramp for a lot of people. So and I'm not even saying this is a practical possibility, I'm not implying that this could easily happen or anything like that. But if we got something like, just theoretically, if somehow we got USDM on Coinbase, that actually already solves a lot of problems. Would Coinbase ever do that, given that, they're a part of Center, which is the issuer, kind of the launch pad for USDC along with Circle? Would they ever allow something like a USDM on Coinbase? Hard to imagine, right? Hard to imagine. Bindocam says, I'd have been minting USDM if my state was allowed. Yeah, I see a lot of people saying that. It's kind of too bad. I know it is difficult to get those licenses. USDM obviously had to put in a lot of work to get licenses in the states. They have it. They have those licenses in. So I'm super glad they did. But Yeah, it'd be nice if it was like national, if it was a national regulatory framework instead of state by state, and then they could just get one license and be good for the entire United States. That'd be nice. Um, Jeff Burns says the same thing. I'm in Ohio, so I can't mint USDM yet. Would be nice. Yeah, I mean, it's a lot harder to, or I should say it's pretty easy when you can just go on Coinbase and grab USDC whenever you want. Those are definitely two different worlds, but very appreciative of everything that USDM has done for sure. So I think we've gone for an hour and 15 minutes. I think that's pretty much all of the news for the weekend. But I've said this the last several weekends on these sort of episodes that most people will watch actually on Monday. Most people will end up watching this not live, but they'll watch the replay on Monday. The last several of these episodes, though, at the start of the week, I've said it was a good news weekend. There was like a lot of news to start the week off with. That was probably no more true any other weekend than it was this weekend. Obviously, we had a lot of things going on. So hopefully this adds up to another weekend of a lot of news. And hopefully it's good news this week. I think we've had the last several weeks I've said that. And then we proceeded to have like some pretty concentrated doses of sort of negative news. So maybe we're about due some good news. If we could just have good news for the rest of the year, I think that'd probably be good for crypto. But also, the more bad news that happens, the more I keep saying it. In order to have those crazy good times, we sort of need to be willing to tolerate these crazy bad times too. But I hope everybody had a great weekend. I hope you're getting ready to have at least a tolerable week. For people in the U.S., it's going to be Thanksgiving at the end of this week. So if you're in the US, I hope you're looking forward to that. If you're anywhere else, I hope you're also looking forward to a great week. And I will talk to everybody soon.